Hello and welcome to Real Menopause Talk. My guest today is Kath Berry. Kath holds a master's degree in acupuncture for drug and alcohol addiction. She's a mother of two and has travelled and lived around the world. Kath has the blueprint for menopause. And on top of that, she feels it's her responsibility to live this blueprint so she can thrive through midlife and indeed the rest of her life. Currently living in Ibiza, party capital of the world, she found perimenopausal and menopausal women were coming into her clinic saying they're not getting any pleasure from recreational alcohol and drug use in the way that they used to. So for 4.5 years, she gathered the world's top brains on menopause to collate research, knowledge and understanding all into one book, Menopause, a comprehensive guide for practitioners, in order to educate practitioners further and bring them up to date on menopause research to better support their clients. Kath is all about women showing up as powerful and influential. And in this episode, we talk about sleep, alcohol and cocaine, the importance of sex, movement, and how perimenopause is a great time to do a life audit of things that are no longer working for you. Hello, Kath.
Hi, Hattie. How are you?
Very well, thank you. How are you?
Really terrific.
You're in Ibiza.
I am, yes. I've been here for 7 years now. So I'm from Australia originally, but Ibiza is now home. So it's my Sydney of the Mediterranean.
Yeah, whereabouts are you?
At Sant'Eulalia. Yeah, so it's really lovely to be sort of on the sea and just having this sort of I was in London for 6 years before that. So it's really nice to sort of have gone from Sydney to London to Ibiza. It feels like a nice in-between of the two.
That's a gorgeous place to be. One of my favourite restaurants is in Sant'Eulalia, but I can't remember its name. It's got lemon groves and orange groves.
Oh, La Paloma.
Yes.
The one, yeah. Oh, I know. Isn't it divine? It is. That's such a great choice.
And you've got beautiful walks around there as well. Gosh, I'm very envious.
That's it. Yeah.
I would love to hear all about your background, as would everybody else, and how you've moved around the world. A little bit about family, maybe, where you grew up and what took you to where you are now.
Right. Okay. So, hello, my name's Kath Berry, and thank you so much for having me on the show today. So, a little bit about my background. You can hear in my voice, I am an Australian. And so how I managed to end up on a small island off the coast of Spain is that I left Australia back in 2007 on a 1-year around-the-world surfing holiday. And I sort of packed up with a passport and a surfboard and headed off around the world and went through the United States where I was surfing but also attending acupuncture conferences. I started my degree in 1995, so I was qualified in 2000 as an acupuncturist. And from the United States into Indonesia and South and Central America, I then ended up in London, where I ended up staying and working in London, running education events for an acupuncture company. And so it was really wonderful to be immersed with these incredible speakers from around the world. And at that time, I was really interested in using technology to take those speakers to my colleagues in Australia. And so I sort of ended up with a Rolodex of like the most incredible experts of acupuncture. And here I was in London. And then I moved to Ibiza in 2015 and decided to take advantage of all these wonderful networks that I'd created. And I set up an online education company. So I started using webinars and web technology, of course, programs like Zoom that we're using to bring this expertise in online courses. And so in 2018, I ran what was called the Menopause Masterclass, where I had 10 experts talking about different aspects of Chinese medicine and menopause. And then off the back of that, I ended up in the situation of thinking this content is incredible and doesn't exist anywhere else. Mm-hmm. So a colleague and I got together in 2018 to condense this information into a book. And I'm really delighted that on the 18th of October, which is International Menopause Day, that we'll be launching this ebook for practitioners of traditional Chinese and East Asian medicine. It's called Menopause, a comprehensive guide for practitioners.
That is terrific, and what brilliant timing. I take it, first of all, that surf did not take you to London. That was acupuncture. And 2018 is very advanced. Given the people I've spoken to and my own experience, finding anything about menopause or perimenopause of substance has been a real challenge. There's a lot out there now, or more, certainly. So 2018, what drove you to bring menopause to the forefront?
That's a wonderful question. So I had set myself up in practice here in Ibiza. I was running a small little acupuncture clinic, and what was happening is women were coming in, and fascinating for me, is that I'd done a degree in Chinese medicine. I'd gone back in Sydney in 2006 and finished a master's degree looking at acupuncture for drug and alcohol addiction. And here I was living in Ibiza, the party capital of the world, and having perimenopausal and menopausal women coming in saying, I'm going out for a cocaine blinder and I'm not recovering like I used to. And so alcohol and cocaine were becoming a really big problem for women. And a problem not in terms of being addiction, but that they weren't getting pleasure from drug taking in the way recreational drug users they had done. And because of my interest in addiction, interested in recreational drug use, my master's was looking at acupuncture for the treatment of drug use. So I started to sort of think, well, what is it about taking cocaine during menopause? What is it about drinking alcohol during menopause? To a lesser degree, what is it about smoking weed during menopause? That sent me on this pathway of exactly what you're saying, looking for information, looking for credible sources of information to be able to better help my patients. And it was at that time that it became very clear that there just really wasn't much. That the last book in Chinese medicine on menopause was written in 1995.
Wow.
And that felt really dated. And of course, I ordered a copy and I hadn't sat with it, and it was talking about basic principles of Chinese medicine. It was actually written for women. It was written for lay people. So as a clinician, it didn't really have the guts of what I was looking for, which is really how to treat really quite extreme symptoms. So I actually contacted the author of that book, this wonderful woman, Honora Lee Wolf in the United States. She's since retired. I managed to track her down in her painting studio. And I said, can I pull you out of retirement to please run a training course for us on menopause? And she reluctantly agreed because I'd managed to convince her that there wasn't anybody else that could teach this. And then that was where the menopause masterclass came from, as I then contacted the best people that I could from around the world, most of them in their 70s and 80s. One has sadly since passed away since recording the material with me. So there was this aspect of trying to, create a central clearinghouse of really good information. And that was genuinely so that I could be a better practitioner for my patients. And as I mentioned, that once we'd done that, once we had this material, it felt natural to then put that all into one place, into a book, and say, okay, let's create a manual for practitioners to better help their patients. In the process, what I feel really confident we've done is as best as possible, make an evidence base rather than just say this is anecdotally what's being done. Is we then looked at the scientific research saying, well, let's look at how can we back this up. Just before I continue, if anybody wants to know the punchline, I thought we're all busy women. If you don't have time to stay till the very end of today's podcast, I'm going to tell you something you already know, and that's, eat well, sleep well, exercise, moderately but regularly, have a wonderful sex life, and love yourself. They are the kind of the key aspects in the outcomes of this 4.5-year research project. There's really no surprises, but what we did do is put an evidence base for that, as why it's so important to eat well, why it's so important to exercise. Hattie, I love the work you're doing. I love that your mantra is a strong coffee and heavy weights. I think that's really all that you need to get through a really healthy menopause. Is staying fit and well. Having coaching, the work that you're doing with women is so important to getting really good messages out there. But it's really what can be done at home. And I really encourage women that I think exercise ultimately, if I was to say one thing, if diet and exercise really come up as the most critical aspect of any form of self-care.
That must have been the most fascinating ride, and speaking to all these wonderful professionals who have experience and knowledge, and learning yourself and sharing your knowledge. I think that's one of the most exciting things about growing older as well, is sharing knowledge and getting more and soaking it up and continuing to learn and expand. So, congratulations, and wow. What did you discover about why we can't party like we used to?
It comes down to the mitochondria. So the mitochondria are the part of the cell which are responsible for the energy production in the body. And it's really fascinating. It's sort of a fairly kind of new and uncharted area. And I always, if you want to visualize mitochondria, I always think they look a bit like gnocchi. Their role is to, as I said, produce energy. And there seems to be a strong correlation, particularly with alcohol, break down the mitochondria. Anything that causes mitochondrial damage is going to reduce the body's capacity to repair, recover, and generate energy. And so that's obviously what we're seeing a lot in menopause with brain fog and this sort of imbalance, is really looking at, well, what is going on from a biochemical perspective that might be causing these quite severe symptoms for some people. And then the paradox to that, the treatment of that, is what can we be doing to look at mitochondrial repair? And that's where the diet, nutrition, taking supplements, exercise. The mitochondria do this wonderful thing called biogenesis, which is they basically, if bits are broken, if they're damaged in any way, that they can sort of fossick and hunt and reform, and they basically regenerate by bits that are broken off them, they kind of find in other places. So again, anything that we can be doing to help this biogenesis process, this mitochondrial repair, is going to downstream cause a greater uptake of adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is the energy molecule. And what's lovely is anybody who's come across Chinese medicine often hears the concept of qi. Now, what is qi? Qi is energy. How does it exist? We have lots of it or we have none of it. We can make it, we can restore it, we can cultivate it. And what's lovely, if we think about qi as this ATP molecule, and that's formed in the mitochondria. So what I get excited about is that the science is catching up with these really ancient concepts. We're so fortunate to have this incredible understanding of both Eastern and Western medicine, and there's a fusion now. They're coming together in a way that they never have before.
Having studied mitochondria and ATP and energy production when I was doing my personal training exams, and heard about qi because I've turned to acupuncture many times in my life, I'm a huge fan of it, I'd never put the two together. But it just does make perfect sense. How do you use acupuncture to create more energy, or how do you help the women who come to see you now?
So if you want to imagine, I always visualize that the body is this whole incredible systems of, as we know, it's these biochemical systems. So there's mechanical systems, which is our movement, and that's obviously where the physical exercise comes in, strength building, bone building, preventing things like osteoporosis. That where acupuncture helps us, and it's on the chemical level, is this thing called purinergic signaling. And this is, again, it's where the chemicals that work between the brain and all the tissues in the body. So from a very cellular level, you've got the mitochondria, and that feeds into cells. The cells feed into tissues. The tissues feed into organs. And then the organs then feed into systems, the entire mechanics. So where the acupuncture works is on that very, very microscopic cellular level, tiny little signalings. And often what I'll say to my patients is, I'm creating a micro trauma in this site, in this spot in your elbow, in your hand, or in your foot. And what it's doing is the brain doesn't really differentiate between a spear or a tiny fine needle. It understands that there's been damage done, and the damage and it goes into its effectively its repair process. So by signaling to the brain that we need to repair these very critical junctions, that you're setting off a cascade, a healing cascade. And what's lovely, I talked about the mitochondria being one of the mechanisms of acupuncture. Another, which we've only really come to understand in the last 10 or 15 years, is the idea of fascia, of the fascia being the fabric. And of course, a personal trainer, this is exactly what you're dealing in, is the muscle tissue and the fabric repair. Anybody that's a meat eater will have eaten a steak, and that thin sort of silky fabric that you're pulling off when you're getting to the muscle tissue of the meat, that's the fascia. It's this incredible soft tissue network. And when we look at how the body communicates, as we're understanding that the chemical pathways are following this tiny microscopic spider's web that runs over the whole body. But what this means is we can understand yoga and acupuncture work on exactly the same mechanism. It's stretching that fabric. It's creating tiny, tiny damage to that tissue that you get this neurological response from the brain. So really what it tells us is any form of exercise, any form of stretching, and any form of penetration to specific points is going to have a healing response, which is just, again, what it means is, Hattie, that both yours and my job actually now has the scientific rigor to explain this is why exercise is so important. This is why weightlifting, which is why pushing the body beyond its boundaries is so essential for good health. And that's why movement is probably the most fundamental aspect of healing and recovery as well.
That's fantastic to have it actually as genuine evidence so people can see and read and understand what it does rather than just the anecdotal. What would your key pillars, I know you've already touched on them earlier just to save people time, what would your key pillars be to go through perimenopause and menopause successfully?
So I mentioned the diet and the exercise, which we've spoken about. Probably the one that was the most eye-opening was around sleep as well. And sleep is such a big problem for people going through perimenopause and menopause and things like hot flushes and night sweats. But one of the things around sleep hygiene strategies. And so again, the science behind why it's so important to not use any form of screen towards the end of the evening and into the nighttime. And so what we're seeing is that the blue light, particularly the refractive index of blue light that you get from an iPad or from a TV screen or from a mobile phone, is that's interrupting the part of the brain which is trying to start to slow down. So it really is around, I guess, again, it's the science of why it's really important to get a good night's sleep and then the strategies that can be used in place to do that. But certainly sleep is one of the most fundamental aspects of recovery and repair. And it's not just about feeling good and coping. It is on a cellular level, the time of day in which, as I mentioned, the biogenesis, looking at the mitochondria reforming and doing everything they can to become energy-making units, that without a good night's sleep and any disruptions to sleep is going to interfere with their process, which then has that trickle-down effect through the whole system. And of course, I mentioned earlier alcohol and cocaine and alcohol, they are other disruptors to sleep. And therefore, it's intercepting the very system which has been put in place to recover and repair. Is that if we start messing about with that, then we are, we're effectively, disabling our own process of recovery. So I think sleep is one of the most fundamental. I don't know, Hattie, from your experience, but somehow we seem in society to have made it that if people have a nap during the middle of the day, that they're failing, or that somehow you've got to push through, power through, and that sleep is seen as an indulgence of like, oh, they slept in. You sleep in on a Sunday morning as a treat. And so, that's sort of, I feel like we need to reshape that for ourselves and say, no, it's actually just about good health and modeling to, we when we're raising children, we force them to have a nap during the middle of the day. But you put these children down to rest and then run around like a lunatic cleaning the house. It really should be the same as, mums should be napping as much as their kids. And that idea of napping is just being a very, very healthy part of the healing process, of the preventative and healing process as well. The other one that I mentioned in the, my sort of talking pillars is I'm a big advocate, a bit like your former podcast interviewee, Nadine. And, she was talking about the virtues of sex. And I really feel strongly that's one of the things which, around the menopausal age, as people describe a low libido. And that makes me sad that it's something that's sort of accepted. It's like, well, it's like you have sex in the first part of your life. And then once you stop reproducing, then you stop having sex. And I feel really strongly that that's a message that women need to hear, is it's okay to start talking about low libido, to look at options for low libido treatment. There's some fantastic research coming around testosterone replacement as just small amounts to sort of get the libido going again as potentially a last resort if diet and nutrition don't help. But one of the things I would extend on Nadine's talk around having a healthy sex life is also having healthy sex life with yourself. I feel like relying on a partner to be responsible for your orgasms is it's a bit like getting somebody else to drive your car for you. So I sort of feel like if women can take on the responsibility of their own, sexual appetite, which is what I think a libido is. And so learning that is something that is really important to try and maintain, even for vaginal health. I often will talk to women about trying to just see if you can masturbate, see if you can get your interest in libido going. And that masturbation should also include internal, so penetrative masturbation rather than just clitoral. Because what you're wanting to do is, again, create sort of a stimulation to the vaginal muscles. That some of the urogenital problems that we see are quite literally a little bit of neglect. So I often, sort of try and imagine the female body being a bit like a vintage sports car that just you make sure you turn the engine over. Don't let it gather dust. Like it's precious and it needs to be highly revered, but it doesn't have to sit in the garage. But it's really important to get that on the road and get it out there, and it doesn't have to be about other people. Very much about being about your own relationships with your own self and sexuality. And I would encourage anyone to listen to Nadine's talk because she just nails the importance of sexual vibrancy during menopause.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'll pass that on to Nadine as well. I think it's partly about enjoying the second part of life. And certainly the people I've spoken to in Chinese medicine have termed, instead of menopause, it's second spring, which is such a lovely positive way of looking at this part of life, and full of joy and blossoming, which should include good sleep, sex, good food and movement. So you've covered all of those beautifully. What was your own experience like, knowing what you know?
what I've just turned 46, so I'm in an unusual position of sort of being, I almost want to imagine myself, I feel like this book that we've written is the blueprint for menopause. And now my responsibility is to go through and live every aspect. So for example, I gave up drinking 3.5 years ago around the time of starting this research, going, hang on a minute, alcohol. And I'm an Australian, that's sort of like a national sport is to drink. So that was really tough for me. I found that really, really challenging, that I had taken alcohol as being a treat. It's like, which it is. I really appreciate that it's a central nervous system depressant. The job of alcohol is to slow you down. So it's to help calm you down. And I had 2 young kids both together. My kids are now 9 and 10. When my son was 5 months old, I was pregnant with my daughter. So I had these sort of 2 toddlers, all very close succession, and living in London, isolated from family. And so I sort of felt alcohol was sort of, pour myself a glass of wine on and I put the kids in the bath. And what I found myself was around 3 o'clock in the afternoon thinking, I think it might be bath time. I think it might be bath time for the kids. Is it bath time already? And just, noticing bath time got, earlier and earlier every day, and just thinking that's where alcohol features, is it's a wonderful at turning off stress, and that's an understanding that's what its molecular makeup is a depressant. It subdues the stress aspects of our physiology. But of course, what we know is it just starts, it does start to interrupt things, and it over the long term, it actually creates stress because it does things like interrupt sleep. And if you're not sleeping well, then that has its knock-on effect for the following days. So for me, getting rid of alcohol was a really big part of looking towards having a healthier menopause. The second aspect was really increasing exercise. As I mentioned, I went on a surfing holiday. I'm from Australia. We love our sports. I'm a very keen swimmer. But once I started looking in the actual scientific rigor of the value of exercise. And again, anybody listening today, you don't have to have matching lycra and sign up to a, Ashtanga yoga class every day, but it's really around movement, finding movement, dancing, walking the dog, dancing around the house, just anything that involves getting the body moving. And as I mentioned, that's that fascia, the stretching beyond the fabric slightly, is you want to create anything that just pushes the body that tiny bit further than what the movement that feels comfortable. So it has to have that stretch feeling, the stretch sensation, and that sort of getting a light sweat, getting the heart rate, getting the cardiovascular system pumping. There's a wonderful theory in Chinese medicine. It's everything should be done to 70%. So none of this sort of like boot camp, floor yourself, vomit at the end, that's actually considered paradoxically not good for you, that you want to exercise to 70%. Eat to 70% full, have 70% of your day dedicated to activity and the rest to resting. So everything should be around this idea of moderation. And I love that sort of, I parent to 70%. I'm like, yeah, I'm about a good 70% parent. The 30% of the time they're on their screens and eating, just sort of their homework doesn't get done. But I sort of figure I apply that 70% theory to most things because it just makes for an easy, wonderful life. Before we move on, there's this other wonderful theory of Chinese medicine. You talked about the second spring, and where the Chinese view of menopause fits in is it's called a gate of life, and that we have 3 major gates of life as women. The first is puberty, the second is pregnancy and childbirth, and then the third is menopause. Now, some women choose not to have children or may not be able to or may not find a suitable partner at the time. But puberty and menopause are considered these wonderful gates. And that concept of the second spring is looking, how do you want to redefine this next chapter? The final gate is death. This is it. This is it. So this is the last opportunity for making major significant changes. And I love that idea of saying it's now or never, and that, as Nadine had said, it's sort of, you're in the short half of your life now. I think that's a real look at it, saying, you're running out, not running out of time, but this is now an audit. Look at, one of the other things I think is wonderful is giving people permission to dump some friends that don't serve you any well. If you're socializing with people that don't bring you pleasure and joy, or don't have the same worldview, or create stress around things like if they're financially stressed in their own life and make you feel anxious about your own situation, whatever it is, I give you full permission to dump old friends. That it's, just thinking life's too short for whatever sentimental reason. I sort of feel, I don't know how you feel, Hattie, but I feel a little bit like COVID might have been a chance for some people to cull some friendships that weren't serving them anymore. I'm thinking, what are the great things came from COVID? A total adaptation of technology, but also our relationship to our time and what brings us pleasure and joy, and thinking, actually gave a lot of people permission to say no to things that they didn't want to do anymore. So thinking that I think menopause does the same.
I think the combination, of COVID and menopause gave a lot of people time to work out what actually suited them. Exactly. And what they want from life and where they're willing to put their energies. Remove a few things that don't work in your life anymore, whether that's alcohol or friends or friends with alcohol.
Which can go together. That's right. It can go together. You know, the drinking friend, the friends that you realise you only enjoy their company after you've had a few glasses of wine, or the drinking becomes central to the way you connect or communicate. And then in the absence of alcohol, those friendships might not look as fun or as interesting or as entertaining.
I've met a few people since who've said actually they prefer to see a group for coffee because it just eradicates that question of I'm not drinking, but why are you not drinking? Or I am, or it keeps it simple. But some people still do question it.
It's true. I think there is an element of that somehow they feel like they're being judged if they do, or, you know, this sort of, it's a really interesting one socially. You know, I saw that particularly, you know, being a parent to young children, and there was this sort of like, oh, it's wine o'clock and let's have a wine with lunch. And, you know, once you sort of opt out of that, it's looking at socially where you fit in and how people relate to that. And again, one of the things I have COVID to thank for walking dates at the time that restaurants and bars and things were closed, and saying, let's meet and go for a long walk together. And those friendships just becoming so rich because of walking and the talking and the movement. And so again, I encourage anyone, if you're looking to reform new friendships, you know, having nice walks you can do even just around the neighbourhood. A walk talk friendship is very, very different to meeting in a bar or having a glass of wine. And ultimately, I think it serves our physiology better in the long run as well.
What is the perception of menopause or perimenopause over in Ibiza?
It's a funny island. You know, just to give you an example, for those listening that haven't been to Ibiza, it's a small island, a couple of 100 kilometres off the coast of Spain. It has a resting population of around 100,000 residents and swells from 3 to 5 million in the summer. So it is this incredible, I liken it to be living on a cruise ship. It's this sort of tiny little island that has this enormous population in the summertime, all which is dedicated usually to the club drug drinking restaurant scene. And then on the other side we have a huge amount of yoga, lots of retreats. We have a really wonderful program of lots of people coming for different types of healing therapies. It's incredible. We call it sort of the retox island. You can have everything available on this island. And so here, one of the things that I have noticed though is that there is a general focus on the aesthetic. It's a beach island. It's a bikini island. People are very conscious of what they're wearing and how they present. And as a result, you know, I think that the women struggle with the aging process. And, you know, this is again why I think it's so important in the narrative to talk about reframing menopause rather than it being a loss of the reproductive years and an aging, I guess a negative association is really going, you know, women showing up as powerful, women showing up as influential. The women that seem to suffer the most with menopause are the ones that are really attached to their identity as a younger woman. That's either being, you know, sexually attractive, you know, the way they appear to men. You know, some women will describe it so that they feel invisible in society. And I sort of think, you know, okay, let's look at what that really means is you can open up and be more authentic, be yourself, wear what you want, dress how you want, say what you want. So I think it's, you know, really allowing women to have more of a voice and create a bit of a landscape that looks new. And from a Chinese medicine point of view, we talked earlier about the science, but this is more of a theoretical framework. Is in Chinese medicine, there's a concept of jing, which is your essence. It's the essential being. And when a child grows into a woman, her jing turns into menstrual flow. And so this idea of that menstruation is very much part of this jing cycle of creating jing and then you lose it. And then you're doing everything you can to have this sort of vital essence build through life. And one of the lovely concepts is menopause is without menstruation and without losing all that jing, women can repurpose that and become really super powerful. And I think we're seeing that. We're seeing that female prime minister in the UK. We're seeing that in politics, in the way that the world is being shaped by women in this later stage. And I feel really excited by that, saying let's rather than, again, this sense of loss, let's look at what we can redo with all that energy, with that sense of newfound identity, you know, working out for women. It's if their children have grown up or they haven't had them, what does this final, you know, the second spring look like for many women? So that's really exciting. It's really fun to think of reframing menopause as this really super positive chance to enter this final gate. You've given this last set of keys. What are you going to do with them?
I am so excited about what happens next. I have to keep checking myself to make sure I don't miss the journey towards that final gate, because that's all part of it as well. But the more people I speak to about actually getting to what Luann Brizendine has renamed the upgrade, I love all of that energy and all that excitement. Kath, have you got any parting pearls of wisdom?
One of the things I would say is I don't think that women should turn to Google for the answers. That, one of the benefits of the programs that you're offering, Hattie, and that other therapists, other people, through personal training, through nutrition, through naturopathy, to be honest, acupuncture itself, it doesn't really matter which tool is being used to help women through this process. But I would strongly encourage a woman to have some form of coach or guide or someone, or group of people that can help in the process. One of the lovely things, as you know, is that we often don't work in isolation. We've always got a network of people, so that by entering into any form of therapeutic care, a woman is accessing that entire network. As we've both discovered in me with writing this book and you with your interviewing so many people, it really is so diverse and it's so complicated, and menopause really is a very personal journey. Some of the other things which women will be going through around the same time, so it's not just the physical process of what's happening from a physiological perspective, but socially, this is around the time that women get divorced, children grow up. It's also around the time that parents get old and dependent and often sometimes into their final sort of palliative care stage. So all of a sudden, we've got all these other factors, notwithstanding work, what's happening socially, what's happening financially. So for that reason, I feel like it's really important not to do it alone. It's really about saying this is a really great opportunity to get some help, have someone come on board and say, let's be in contact with each other maybe once a week, once a month, maybe even once every 6 months, but over that sort of 3 to 5 years. For some people, say, for example, hot flushes can be experienced for up to 7 years. So it's not worth suffering because it's not necessarily going to go away quickly. Therefore, it's worth investing in having somebody that can help in that journey.
Where can people find you?
So I run an agency called the Treating Women Academy. My audience is for other practitioners that are trained in helping women. On social media, on Instagram, on Kath B. Berry, the B snuck in there, so Kath double B. Berry. And what's wonderful is I love talking about this. I love speaking on podcasts and I love sharing information. So I see myself as a librarian of this content that I only see a handful of women in my practice, but I love reading about it, listening to podcasts myself, and ultimately trying to make other people's jobs easier. So, and again, thank you again for your podcasts. I've loved listening to your other speakers. It's always wonderful just hearing what people are doing and being so inspired. So thank you for all your recordings that you've got available.
It is always a pleasure, but thank you so much for your time and wisdom. I've really enjoyed talking with you. Have a
Thanks
great
again.
rest of your day.
You too. Bye for now.
Bye. I will leave all the details of how to find Kath in the show notes. Please follow Real Menopause Talk on the podcast app of your choice and sign up to our New Look newsletter to stay up to date. And please, if you're enjoying what you hear, do leave us a review. It really makes all the difference. Thank you for listening. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode.